The effects of child abuse on a victim can result in psychological and physical damage that can stay with the victim for a lifetime. Psychological damage for a child can be immediate, resulting in feelings of isolation, fear, and mistrust of others. Problems that can affect the victim over the span of their lifetime into adulthood can include low self-esteem issues, depression, and difficulties with relationships. Warning signs of physical abuse to children can include frequent injuries or unexplained bruises, welts, or cuts. The child is always watchful and on alert as if waiting for something bad to happen. Injuries appear to have a pattern such as marks from a hand or belt. The child shies away from touch, flinches at sudden movements, or seems afraid to go home, and wears inappropriate clothing to cover up injuries such as long-sleeve shirts on hot days. Will has several physical abuse cuts on him as seen in the scene of the breakup. Is it okay to talk about like the warning signs of physical abuse just like randomly?
Yeah.
Neglect and emotional abuse play a role in affecting the child as well. When a child is neglected, they are left without proper nutrition, clothing, have poor hygiene, and lack supervision. Neglected children do not get what they need physically and emotionally to thrive. According to a National Institute of Justice study, abused and neglected children were 11 times more likely to be arrested for criminal behavior as a juvenile, 2.7 times more likely to be arrested for violent and criminal behavior as an adult, and 3.1 times more likely to be arrested for one of many forms of violent crime, juvenile or adult. Research consistently reflects an increased likelihood that abused and neglected children will smoke cigarettes, abuse alcohol, or take illicit drugs in their lifetime. According to a report from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, as many as 2/3 of people in drug treatment programs reported being abused as children. In the intense scene in the dorm room where Skylar asks Will to come to California with her, the conversation escalates into a screaming fight. Will is worried that Skylar would one day wake up and find something that she didn't like about him, and then he'd be stuck in California. Skylar tried to reassure him that she loved him and she was willing to take a chance and give it a shot and said she wanted to know everything. Will slammed his hand against the wall, lifted up his shirt, and told Skylar she didn't want to know about his foster homes, about the times he was beat up by his foster fathers, or how he had cigarettes put out on him, or how he had been stabbed. He had evidence of physical abuse all along his abdomen, and he was emotional about it. The scene. Adult attachment theory is based off the theory of infant attachment to a parent or caregiver. The bond formed between an infant and their caregiver is what leads to the ability to form a bond with a romantic partner in adulthood. Adults with attachment disorder can be secure, avoidant, or anxious resistant, just like children who struggle with attachment disorder. Avoidant adults, like Will, may not seem to care too much about relationships and prefer not to be dependent on others or have others depend on them. According to Dr. Fraley, whether an adult is secure or insecure in his or her adult relationships may be a partial reflection of his or her experiences with his or her primary caregivers. This would make sense since Will did not have a primary caregiver that gave him what he needed as a child. Adult attachment can be linked back to child abuse. Will did not receive the proper amounts of love and nurture from a caregiver, and now he is having problems with his relationship with Skylar. Will has struggled with relationships in the past. He mentions how he has slept with other women and he never really has had a girl before. When Skylar does break him down and gets close to him and asks him to get serious by moving to California, Will backs away. Will avoids relationships that require seriousness, including those in his work relationships. Will refuses to get a job despite his brilliant talents of being a genius, in part that it means someone is depending on him to show up. Treatment for attachment disorder and recovering from traumatic experiences such as child abuse should include psychological individual therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. Treatment needs to include identification of feelings, where they came from, and be able to be okay about talking about them. According to the Institute for Attachment.org website, The client needs to resolve early trauma through revisiting the circumstances, reframing the trauma, healing the trauma, and empowering the person to grow beyond the trauma. Treatment needs to include how to be more self-controlled, enhance self-esteem, and develop a positive sense of identity. Therapy should help the client learn to accept and give love so they can prosper in personal relationships. Some therapies suggest role-playing to help a person say what they need to say to those who have hurt them. In cases where an individual is still living with their family, family therapy is often advised to help the individual feel secure at home and to help the family members help the member that is struggling. I made that part up.
So nice.
Right? It's right there. Treatment for Will came through Dr. Sean McGuire, even though Will didn't expect it. Dr. McGuire used therapy for Will, where it took serious time for Will to admit what had happened. Along the way, Dr. McGuire reveals his own personal problems about his wife and his life without her. Although the film makes it look fast, the therapy sessions actually lasted over long periods of time to help Will recover. The big breakthrough came when Dr. McGuire and Professor Gerald were in a heated screaming argument about what was best for Will. Gerald said he was throwing his life away and his talents were going unused, and Dr. McGuire stood up for Will and said what was needed for Will was to recover and to not worry about the fact that he was a genius right now. Through their long talks, especially the ones on the bench, and when Dr. McGuire told Will, "It was not your fault, it was not your fault, listen to me, it was not your fault," the embracing grip the pair had at each other during the scene was evidence that therapy had helped Will recover. He was able to listen to his friend Chucky and one day not be there to be picked up for work with his other friends. Will had made the decision to go see about a girl, as Dr. McGuire had put it. Dr. McGuire took away from the therapy as well, learning from Will that he needed to live his life again even though his wife was gone. Cognitive therapy had helped Will change his ideas about what he can do with his life, and that his childhood did not have to hold him back, and that he was in fact able to have good personal relationships, as evidence that he went and chased after Skylar in California.
The nature versus nurture debate is one of the oldest issues in psychology. The debate centers on the relative contributions of genetic inheritance and environmental factors to human development. The nature versus nurture debate is about the relative importance of an individual's innate qualities versus personal experiences in determining individual differences in physical and behavioral traits. The philosophy that all humans acquire all or most of their behavioral traits from nurture is known as tabula rasa, or blank slate. An example of nature is your genes. The physical and personality traits determined by your genes stay the same irrespective of where you were born and raised. An example of nurture is your childhood, or how you were brought up. Someone could be born with genes to give them a normal height but be malnourished in childhood, resulting in stunted growth and a failure to develop as expected. An example from the movie is although Skylar and Will had similar nature, both were extremely smart, gifted, and funny, their nurture was very different. Skylar was raised in a wealthy family with both parents who taught her how to love, create relationships, and make connections with people. Will grew up in many different foster homes, getting physically abused at every single one. This lack of stability and child abuse led to his inability to create relationships, trust, and control his anger. Intelligence is defined as general cognitive problem-solving skills, a mental ability involved in reasoning, perceiving relationships and analogies, calculating, learning quickly, and more. Earlier, it was believed that there was one underlying general factor at the intelligence base, but later psychologists determined that it is more complicated and could not be determined by such a simplistic method. Some psychologists have divided intelligence into subcategories. For example, Howard Gardner maintained that it is comprised of 7 components: musical, bodily kinesthetic, logical mathematical, linguistic, spatial, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. There are 4 different ways you can boost your intelligence. 1. Minimalize television time. The problem is watching television does not use your mental capacity or allow it to recharge. It is like having energy sapped out of a muscle without the health benefits of exercise. Number 2. Exercise. Exercising always leads to greater learning because it improves productivity during after time. Using more body clears your head and creates a wave of energy. Afterwards, you feel invigorated and can concentrate more easily. Number 3. Read challenging books. Many people like to read popular suspense fiction, but generally those books aren't mentally stimulating. If you want to improve your thinking and writing ability, you should choose books that make you focus. Reading a classic novel can change your view of the world and make you think in a more precise, elegant English. Step 4. Go to bed early and wake up early. Nothing makes it harder to concentrate than sleep deprivation. You will be most rejuvenated if you go to bed early and don't sleep more than 8 hours. If you stay up late and compensate by sleeping late, you'll feel sleepy and wake up having trouble focusing. In the movie Good Will Hunting, Will spends lots of time at home reading books, and he has an remarkable photographic memory. He worked as a janitor at MIT, saw a math problem that a professor had written on the chalkboard, and quickly solved it and moved on, leaving the math professors at MIT astounded. Will has a natural intelligence that his other friends did not have. He tries to cover it up and ignore it so he can fit in with his friends. However, his best friend Chucky confronts him about it. He tells Will that he wants him to pack up and leave and use his talent instead of working at the junkyard with the other boys, who do not have the gifts that Will has. Ethics are very important when carrying out any type of psychological research. Before any research method can begin, it is vital that a code of ethics is upheld, as people will be involved. Ethics refers to the correct rules and conduct necessary when carrying out research. We have a moral responsibility to help protect research participants from harm. Before the study begins, the researcher must outline to the participants what the research is about and ask their consent to take part. However, it is not always possible to gain informed consent. This is acceptable as long as what happens to the participants is something that could easily happen to them in everyday life. Researchers must ensure that those taking part in the research will not be caused distress. They must be protected from physical and mental harm. This means you must not embarrass, frighten, offend, or harm patients. Normally, the risk of harm must be no greater than that in ordinary lifestyle. For example, participants should not be exposed to greater risks or additional risks than those that they would encounter in their normal lifestyle. The third part is where the participants are misled or wrongly informed about aims of the research. They may not be misled. For example, in Milgram's study of obedience, the participants thought that they were given electric shocks to a learner when they answered the question wrong. In reality, no shocks were given, and the learners were confederates of Milgram. This is sometimes necessary in order to avoid demand characteristics. Participants must be deceived as little as possible, and any deception must not cause distress. If you have gained participants informed to consent by deception, then they have to agree to be taking it out without actually knowing what they are consenting to. The true nature of research should be revealed at the earliest possible opportunity, or at least during debriefing. Participants and the data gained must be kept confidential and anonymous unless the participant gives their full consent. No names must be used in the research report. Even though the therapy sessions between Sean McGuire and Will Hunting were extremely unconventional and may have crossed some of the therapist-client boundaries, the sessions did follow the code of ethics and ended up benefiting both Will and Sean. There was informed consent. Will knew exactly why he was going there and what Sean was trying to heal inside of him. He was debriefed and protected, and he did not go through any extra stress that he would not face in his everyday life. He was also not deceived. Dr. McGuire was completely upfront with him and did not hide anything. Everything was confidential, and Will was always given the opportunity to stop showing up to the sessions. The therapy sessions helped Will move on with his life, use his intelligence, and form a relationship with Skylar, skills he would never have earned without Dr. McGuire's help.